The ability to see structure is often mistaken for an instruction to act upon it. A weakness becomes visible, a missing connection reveals itself, or the future consequence of a present decision appears before anyone else has noticed it. To the architect, this perception can feel so complete that intervention seems inseparable from seeing. Yet perception and participation are different capacities, and confusing them is where a gift begins to exceed its proper proportion. What can be seen clearly is not automatically what must be touched. This distinction is difficult because architect perception rarely arrives as a vague preference. It often presents itself as an internally coherent sequence. This choice will create that pressure. That pressure will weaken this relationship, and the weakened relationship will eventually destabilize the larger structure. By the time others are discussing the immediate decision, the architect may already be living several consequences ahead of them. Their concern is therefore not imaginary simply because it is early. But accuracy about a possible outcome does not establish that preventing it is the only intelligent response. Some structures need correction, while others need enough freedom to expose what they actually are. A system interrupted too early may appear stable only because its weakness was never allowed to become visible to the people participating in it. The architect may preserve the function while preventing the learning that would have made the function sustainable. Everyone benefits from the repair, but no one develops the perception that the repair required. What looks like successful intervention can quietly create dependence upon the one who intervened. Overengineering begins here, not in a love of complexity, but in an inability to leave visible incompleteness undisturbed. The architect notices what could be strengthened, clarified, protected, streamlined, or prepared for future expansion. Each addition can be justified on its own, and many of them may genuinely improve the structure. Yet improvement is not neutral when it answers questions the structure has not encountered and solves pressures the participants have not learned to carry. A design can become so prepared for life that life has no room to alter it. You may recognize this in ordinary moments that appear too small to be called architectural. Someone begins organizing a gathering, and you immediately see the scheduling conflict, the missing information, the unclear responsibilities, and the point where communication will fail. You offer one correction, then another, and soon you are carrying the invisible frame around an event you did not initiate. Nothing dramatic has happened. You were simply helpful at every available opening. Only later do you realize that the entire experience has begun leaning upon your capacity to anticipate. The difficulty is that refusing to assist can feel dishonest when you already know what will probably happen. Silence may resemble neglect, and restraint may feel like watching someone walk toward an avoidable consequence. The architect then compares the discomfort of intervening with the greater discomfort of witnessing preventable disorder. Intervention wins because it promises immediate coherence, while restraint offers no guarantee that anyone will learn. But maturity is not measured only by how much disorder you can prevent. It is also measured by what you can allow without abandoning your care. Overengineering changes the relationship between the architect and the structure. What began as participation becomes private authorship, even when no title or authority has been given. The architect carries an internal version of how the process should unfold and measures reality against it. Deviations begin feeling like defects because they move away from the coherence already visible within. The structure is no longer being encountered as a living field. It is being compared with a completed pattern held in one person's mind. This is why more intelligence does not always produce more life. A perfectly reasoned structure can become inhospitable to discovery because every opening has already been assigned a purpose. People can function inside it, yet they cannot meaningfully influence it without appearing disruptive. The architect may believe they are protecting the shared work, while others experience the work as something they are permitted to occupy but not shape. Coherence remains, but participation thins. Control emerges through a different mechanism. Overengineering adds structure because incompleteness feels dangerous, while control attempts to govern movement because unpredictability feels dangerous. The controlling architect may not appear domineering. They may be patient, articulate, and sincerely committed to the well-being of everyone involved. Their control is often expressed through anticipation, careful framing, repeated clarification, and the quiet removal of choices likely to produce instability. Nothing is forcibly taken, yet fewer and fewer outcomes are allowed to remain possible. The architect can defend this narrowing with evidence. They have seen what happens when responsibilities are unclear, when emotion outruns discernment, when resources are wasted, or when people make promises without understanding the cost. Their caution is not without history, and their desire for structure may have been formed in environments where no one else protected continuity. They learned that if they did not think ahead, consequences arrived without preparation. Control became less a hunger for power than a method of preventing the return of helplessness. This history matters because behavior cannot be understood only from its outer effect. Someone who appears unable to trust others may once have been the only person noticing what everyone else ignored. Someone who corrects every detail may have lived inside systems where small errors were allowed to accumulate until they became crisis. The nervous system remembers not merely that collapse occurred, but that collapse was visible before it happened and no one responded. From then on, seeing becomes fused with responsibility. Yet the origin of control does not determine its present usefulness. The capacity developed under real pressure can continue operating after the pressure has changed. The architect may enter a healthier environment and still behave as though every unaddressed weakness will eventually become catastrophic. They scan for the first sign of drift, intervene before trust can form, and then interpret the resulting dependence as proof that others cannot carry the structure. Control creates the evidence it uses to justify itself. This cycle is especially difficult to detect because the architect's interventions often work. The meeting is clearer, the project avoids delay, the family remains organized, or the community escapes a conflict that might have divided it. Immediate outcomes reward the controlling behavior, while the unseen cost develops slowly. Others stop exercising judgment. Difficult conversations are redirected through the architect. An initiative declines because initiative carries the risk of correction. The structure succeeds, but fewer people become capable inside it. Eventually, the architect wonders why everything requires their involvement. They may feel surrounded by people who wait to be told, fail to anticipate, or bring problems without bringing solutions. What they may not see is how often another person's unfinished intelligence was met by a completed answer. The architect intended to prevent unnecessary struggle, but struggle was sometimes the environment in which discernment would have formed. By removing every avoidable difficulty, they also removed the conditions through which shared capacity could emerge. Restraint does not mean withholding knowledge to prove a point. It means becoming precise about the difference between danger, discomfort, inefficiency, and unfamiliarity. Danger may require intervention, while discomfort may require presence. Inefficiency may require patience, and unfamiliarity may require curiosity. When these experiences are treated as equivalent, the architect responds to all of them with correction. Mature control is not the ability to govern every variable. It is the ability to recognize which variables were never meant to be governed. Beneath overengineering and control lives a more intimate attachment, the identity of being the one who sees. This identity can remain hidden because it grows around an authentic capacity. The architect does perceive relationships that others miss, and their observations may repeatedly prove valuable. Recognition gathers around them, and eventually seeing is no longer something they do. It becomes the place from which they know who they are. To question their interpretation then feels like questioning their significance. Being correct begins to carry more emotional weight than the situation itself requires. A disagreement about process becomes an encounter with invisibility, and another person's independent insight can feel strangely displacing. The architect may say they want others to notice more, yet experience discomfort when someone sees a pattern first or proposes a structure they did not anticipate. This does not necessarily produce open rivalry. It may appear as refinement, qualification, or the immediate identification of what the other person's insight has not yet included. The attachment also appears when the architect recognizes a pattern that does not require their involvement. They may understand intellectually that another person must discover the truth in their own time, but waiting leaves the architect without a role. The insight sits inside them like unused responsibility, creating pressure to warn, guide, hint, prepare, or quietly redirect. What is difficult is not only the possibility that the other person will suffer, it is the possibility that clear perception may have no assignment. This is one of the deepest thresholds within architect expression, allowing sight to exist without converting it into ownership. A pattern can be visible to you without becoming yours to manage, announce, or complete. You may be shown the weakness of a structure because your participation will eventually matter, but you may also see it because perception is simply part of your way of meeting reality. Not every awareness is a commission. Sometimes the integrity of seeing is preserved only by refusing to recruit it into action. Resistance arises because unused perception can feel wasteful. If you can prevent confusion, why remain silent? If you can improve the design, why permit limitation? If you understand the consequence, why allow the choice? These questions assume that the highest purpose of perception is correction, but perception can also deepen compassion, prepare timing, reveal your own impatience, or show you where another person's authority begins. The fact that insight could alter an outcome does not mean altering the outcome would serve the whole. When the three distortions converge, exhaustion is rarely far behind. Overengineering multiplies what must be maintained, control multiplies what must be monitored, and identity attachment makes release feel like self-betrayal. The architect becomes responsible not only for what they built, but for every future condition their mind can imagine. Rest becomes difficult because the system continues moving when they are absent. Even stillness is occupied by scanning. This burnout is more than the consequence of doing too much. It is the exhaustion of maintaining unnecessary responsibility for coherence. The architect carries conversations after they have ended, reviews decisions that belong to other people, and privately rehearses solutions to problems no one has asked them to solve. Their body may be resting while their perception remains stationed at every vulnerable point in the field. Eventually, the gift that once made reality intelligible makes reality feel endlessly demanding. A correction cycle may then appear as loss of clarity, failed construction, delayed movement, resistance from others, or circumstances that refuse to organize themselves. The architect may interpret this period as evidence that their capacity has weakened or that the field has become unresponsive. Yet the interruption may be restoring a proportion that success has obscured. Perception, participation, timing, and control had become fused, and the structure can no longer support that fusion. What feels like obstruction may be the first condition under which a more mature precision becomes possible. Correction is not punishment for having built too much or cared too deeply. It is the removal of an authority that perception quietly assumed but was never given. The architect is not being asked to stop seeing, to become indifferent, or to distrust the pattern that genuinely reveals itself. They are being asked to remain present at the moment when sight no longer guarantees intervention. This is where the gift becomes spacious enough to serve something beyond its own certainty. The developmental threshold is therefore not reached when the architect finally creates a flawless structure. It is reached when they can discern whether structure is needed, whether this is the moment to offer it, and whether they are the person through whom it should arrive. Sometimes maturity builds, sometimes it repairs, and sometimes it watches an imperfect process acquire its own intelligence. The deepest discipline may be allowing another person, relationship, or field to become capable without being made into an extension of your foresight. Perception does not confer ownership of the blueprint. Restraint can become another form of control when the architect turns non-intervention into the new correct design. Having learned that seeing does not confer ownership, they may begin withholding themselves with the same certainty through which they once interfered. They watch a structure weaken and tell themselves that others must be allowed to learn, that consequences must reveal what advice would only conceal. Yet the decision not to act can still place the architect at the center if they privately assume they understand what everyone else needs to experience. Control has not disappeared merely because it has become motionless. This unsettles the apparent safety of stepping back. Distance can protect emergence, but it can also become a concealed experiment conducted without the consent of those inside it. The architect may allow a preventable failure because they believe failure will produce maturity, never asking whether the people affected would have chosen that lesson at that cost. What appears to be respect for another's process may contain an unspoken superiority. I can see what is coming, but you need to discover it yourself. The architect no longer controls the outcome directly. They control the conditions under which help will be withheld. There are moments when silence does not honor another person's authority. It abandons them inside an asymmetry they cannot perceive. If you see a structural danger that others have no reasonable way to recognize, your refusal to speak may not create freedom. It may preserve your innocence while transferring the consequence to them. You remain untouched by the accusation of control because you did nothing. But doing nothing can be an architectural act when your presence, knowledge, or role made intervention possible. This is why the distinction between danger and discomfort, though necessary, cannot settle the matter. Danger itself is interpreted through perspective, history, proximity, and tolerance. One person sees a temporary strain where another sees the beginning of irreversible damage. The architect may exaggerate risk because they have been shaped by collapse, but they may also recognize risk precisely because collapse taught them what early signals look like. The wound and the gift can speak through the same perception using nearly the same voice. No simple internal feeling will reliably separate them. Anxiety can accompany a true warning, and calm can accompany avoidance. Urgency can arise from control, but it can also arise because timing actually matters. The architect who waits to feel completely pure before acting may wait until action is no longer useful. Discernment cannot require the removal of every personal distortion, because no human being enters participation without history. The first deeper pressure, therefore, concerns responsibility under uncertainty. The architect must sometimes act before knowing whether the impulse comes from wisdom, fear, identity, or some mixture of all three. They cannot postpone every decision until their motives become transparent, because living structures continue changing while interpretation is refined. The demand for perfect certainty becomes another way of refusing risk. Mature participation is not action without distortion. It is action willing to remain accountable for what distortion may have entered it. This accountability differs from self-accusation. The architect does not need to distrust every insight or apologize for perceiving what others do not yet see. They need to release the fantasy that correct perception will protect them from relational consequence. Even a necessary intervention may anger someone, interrupt their preferred process, or reveal an authority no one had openly acknowledged. The fact that tension follows does not prove the intervention was wrong, just as a successful outcome does not prove it was right. You may recognize the moment when someone later says, "You should have told me." You remember all the reasons you remained quiet. They had dismissed earlier concerns. The choice belonged to them. You did not want to overstep, and you were attempting to trust their process. Each reason may have been legitimate. Still, their question enters the place where restraint had felt morally clean. You must consider whether your silence served their autonomy or protected you from the discomfort of being misunderstood. The reverse moment is equally destabilizing. You speak because the risk appears real, only to discover that your warning changes the atmosphere more than the danger itself would have. People become cautious around a possibility that might never have developed, and the structure begins organizing itself around the future you name. Your perception did not merely describe the field, it entered the field and altered what became likely. The architect must then face that sight is not passive once it is spoken. A blueprint carried privately is one pattern among many, but a blueprint voiced with confidence can become gravitational. Others may defer to it because the architect has been right before, because the explanation is persuasive, or because no one else can articulate an alternative with equal clarity. Consensus may form without true agreement. The architect can believe they offered information while the group experiences the information as direction. Authority can operate even when the person holding it insists they have none. This creates a second vector around consent, because the question is not only whether to intervene, but what kind of participation the relationship has authorized. In some relationships, you have been trusted with foresight. Remaining silent violates the role you accepted. In others, your insight may be welcome only when requested, regardless of its accuracy. A family member, collaborator, student, friend, or community does not grant the same access simply because you can perceive structure within each one. Capacity does not erase relational boundaries, but boundaries are not always spoken before they are crossed. The architect often tries to solve this by asking permission. Would you like my perspective? Appears to restore choice, and sometimes it does. Yet permission can be complicated when the other person already knows that you have noticed something. They may say yes because refusal feels foolish, defensive, or unsafe. Consent gathered in the presence of perceived expertise is not meaningless, but neither is it automatically free. Even when permission is genuine, it does not authorize every depth of disclosure. Someone may want help with the immediate problem while the architect sees a pattern running through their relationships, habits, identity, and history. Offering the entire architecture may overwhelm the person's capacity to use any part of it. Precision is not measured by how completely you can describe the pattern. It is measured by whether what you reveal can enter the relationship without replacing the other person's contact with themselves. This requires the architect to notice a subtle appetite for completeness. Once a pattern becomes visible, partial communication can feel inaccurate, almost dishonest. You want to explain the origin, the reinforcing cycle, the likely consequence, and the larger structure in which the problem sits. Yet truth delivered at a scale the listener cannot metabolize becomes functionally indistinguishable from pressure. They may accept your map while losing access to their own terrain. The challenge is not solved by making the insight smaller until it becomes harmless. Sometimes a partial truth distorts more than a complete one, and sometimes directness is the only form of respect remaining. The architect cannot replace discernment with a rule about gentleness, brevity, or waiting. Every rule eventually encounters a field for which it is insufficient. What matters is not adherence to a method, but responsiveness to the living relationship, including the possibility that responsiveness will still be imperfect. This is where architect identity meets a more uncomfortable loss than being wrong. The person may see accurately and still not be the appropriate messenger. Another voice may be trusted where theirs is resisted. Another timing may open what theirs would close. Another form may carry what their explanation cannot. The insight can belong to the field without belonging to the architect's expression. To serve it may require passing it, softening it, embodying it, or leaving it unnamed. For the one accustomed to building through articulation, embodiment can feel insufficient. You notice the pattern and change how you participate, but no one knows why. You stop compensating for a weakness, alter a boundary, allow a delayed consequence, or refuse a role that kept the structure artificially stable. The field responds to your changed position before it understands your reasoning. This can be more transformative than explanation, but it offers the architect less recognition and less control over interpretation. Others may call the change selfish, confusing, passive, or inconsistent. They may not see that a hidden support has been withdrawn because it prevented shared responsibility from forming. The architect must then decide whether to explain, defend, or permit misunderstanding. Yet even here there is danger, because the identity of the unseen wise person can become as intoxicating as the identity of the one who openly sees. Silence can create its own private elevation. A third vector enters through correction itself. It is tempting to interpret every stalled period, failed construction, exhaustion, or loss of clarity as a tone reset field restoring proportion. That interpretation can bring meaning to difficulty, but it can also preserve the architect's centrality by making every obstruction part of their developmental design. The failed project becomes a lesson arranged for them. Resistance becomes evidence of necessary recalibration, and uncertainty becomes proof that deeper restructuring is underway. Reality is once again made to orbit the person who interprets it. Some failures are corrective, and some are simply failures. Some delays protect timing, and some delays come from avoidance, poor preparation, conflicting interest, or chance. Exhaustion may reveal unnecessary responsibility, but it may also reveal exploitation, grief, illness, material pressure, or a structure that genuinely lacks enough support. To call every collapse a reset can spiritualize conditions that require practical response. Meaning becomes distortion when it prevents accurate contact with cause. This does not make correction cycles unreal. It means they cannot be identified merely by the emotional usefulness of the interpretation. A true correction may not feel meaningful while it is occurring, and it may never organize itself into a satisfying explanation. The architect may lose a structure without discovering what the loss was for. If meaning is demanded too early, interpretation begins rebuilding coherence before the old architecture has actually been released. The harder destabilization is that restored proportion may not return the architect to the same capacity in a cleaner form. Sometimes correction does not refine the former way of seeing. It ends the conditions through which that way of seeing operated. Precision may become quieter, less comprehensive, or less available on command. The person who once perceived entire structures may enter a period in which only the next honest movement can be known. This can feel less like maturation than diminishment. If identity was built around being the one who sees, reduced clarity threatens more than usefulness. It raises the possibility that the capacity was never entirely permanent, personal, or possessed. Perhaps the field made certain patterns visible because a particular season required them. Perhaps what the architect called "my sight" was a relationship between their attention and conditions that have now changed. The gift may have been real without ever being property. This possibility cannot be resolved by deciding that the sight will certainly return. Promising restoration may only preserve attachment in a more patient form. The architect waits through silence while privately expecting to receive their former position again, treating surrender as an investment in renewed authority. But genuine correction may ask them to participate without knowing whether the familiar capacity will reappear. They must learn whether their belonging survives the absence of what once made them valuable. Here, burnout reveals another face. It may not only result from carrying too much. It may expose how much belonging was being purchased through carrying. If people relied upon the architect's anticipation, organization, and repair, laying those functions down can change the relationships around them. Some connections weaken when usefulness decreases. The exhaustion then contains grief because rest does not merely restore the person. It reveals who knew how to relate to them beyond what they maintained. The architect may be tempted to resume responsibility to recover closeness. A single intervention brings relief, gratitude, and the familiar sensation of being necessary. The system welcomes the old function because systems rarely protest the return of free coherence. What feels like renewed purpose may therefore be the reopening of the same cycle. The body recognizes the cost even while the identity recognizes home. No clean boundary separates devotion from self-erasure here. There are seasons when love genuinely asks someone to carry more than their share because another person cannot yet stand. There are emergencies in which balance is not immediately possible, and relationships in which temporary asymmetry is not distortion but care. The architect who turns proportion into a rigid law may abandon the very field their capacity was shaped to serve. The question is not whether the burden is equal, but whether the burden remains conscious, chosen, revisable, and connected to reality. Mature architect expression therefore cannot be reduced to building less, speaking less, controlling less, or waiting more. Each of these can become another architecture imposed upon a living situation. The deeper capacity is to remain available without assuming centrality, to act without using action as proof of identity, and to refrain without making another person struggle into a lesson you secretly supervise. This availability carries no guarantee of being correct. It replaces the safety of certainty with the discipline of relationship. The blueprint is no longer treated as an object the architect owns, but neither is it dismissed as something they must never touch. It becomes a meeting place between perception, consent, timing, consequence, and the unknown capacities of others. Sometimes the architect will build too soon. Sometimes they will remain silent too long. Correction is not the elimination of these errors, but the willingness to be changed by what the errors reveal. The deepest precision is not never misreading the field. It is refusing to turn any reading, even a brilliant one, into a permanent claim about who you are.
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Vaharat library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.